Good evening, friends, and welcome to this Ember evening gathering. At least good evening to those of you who are in North America. I see a couple of participants who are on other continents, so good afternoon, good morning to you. Welcome to this Ember Day gathering. A word about Ember Days. You can Google it to learn more, of course, but this is an ancient tradition in the Roman Catholic and Anglican churches of quarterly holy days, dating back to the Middle Ages, quarterly holy days to mark the 4 seasons. They're times of prayer and fasting and intentional living to give thanks for the earth and to remember to care for creation and care for people in need. Tonight, we focus on intentionality as we move through this season of Lent. We are sort of reclaiming these Ember Days as a theme that's appropriate for Ligare as we think about the earth and think about the gifts of the earth and think about our care for each other. There are 5 people who are joining me to guide us along the way this evening. Pardon me. Tim King is our Zoom host behind the scenes. Tim is the communications consultant for Ligare. He's the author of a book entitled Addiction Nation, What the Opioid Crisis Reveals About Us. And he's currently finishing the manuscript for a second book entitled What Are Drugs For? Tim lives in North Carolina here in the United States with his wife, Hannah, his daughter, Ruth, and a bloodhound named Hank who appeared on screen earlier. So we welcome Hank. And the rest of our friends. Tim once worked on a farm located in the foothills of the Taurus Mountains in Turkey, where he learned to milk goats and make cheese. And you need to know that about him tonight. He is currently on the historic land of the Catawba tribe. So thank you, Tim. Alec Davis is our musician for the night. He was playing the prelude and will play it several times throughout the service. Alec is a talented musician who is fascinated with the ways that music fits into the larger category of living well and understanding existence. He thinks those things are inherently spiritual pursuits, and I agree with him and am grateful for his music. In addition to working at Westmoreland UCC in Bethesda, Maryland, and working with his piano students, he enjoys being immersed in philosophy and cognitive neuroscience and economics and practicing woodwork and Zen meditation and teaching himself Japanese and making a home with his partner Ed and their cats near Baltimore, Maryland, which is the traditional land of the Piscataway and Susquehannock people. Annette Kay is joining us perhaps from the longest distance. She is a spiritual director, psychotherapist, and multimedia artist. She once crewed on a yacht from Cape Town to the Caribbean, which is a fantastic story, so you'll have to let her tell you that sometime. She cycled from London to Paris as a part of her recovery from cancer, and she mentioned that she's just turned 60 and is due for another challenge. Annette usually lives in the ancient Celtic lands of Northeast England, but is currently staying in New Zealand and is joining us from there next to the sacred mountain, Mount Maunganui, which is on the lands belonging to the Maori tribes of the Tauranga Moana. So welcome, Annette. Bonnie Kozimchak is a spiritual director. She describes that as listening you into the discovery of yourself as you travel between longing and belonging. Her first half of life was specializing in pediatric neuropsychology. Bonnie now melds trauma work with end of life and psychedelic integration. Autocross racing and alpacas provide breath and relief to her life. She lives along the Appalachian Trail on the lands of the Iroquoian along the Susquehanna River. Josh Harper is also one of our speakers tonight. He's a conscientious medicine facilitator and forest ecotherapy guide. He spent 25 years in college ministry designing and leading transformational experiential discipleship programs around social and environmental justice and spiritual formation. He's a husband to his partner Maria and father to his 2 teenage daughters. He lives in the Sasquatch Creek watershed on the unceded land of the Ohlone people, also known as Oakland, California. Josh, Bonnie, and Annette will be speaking. My name is Tim Tutt. I'm a UCC clergy person and nonprofit executive and consultant. I'm on the board of Ligare, and I live in Bethesda, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway people. These Ember evenings, Ember Day services, pardon me, are a new way of being together, as I said earlier, a gift from Ligare. I know that most of you, I'm assuming all of you, are familiar with Ligare as an organization, the Christian Psychedelic Society. If not, please go to ligare.org to learn more. And on that webpage, you may make a donation to support events like this and the work that Ligare does. So thank you for your generosity. I mentioned in the introductions the traditional lands on which each of us is seated this evening, this afternoon, the Iroquoian people, including the Piscataway and Susquehannock, the Maori. So we honor the people of the land. We also honor these speakers and leaders, and we honor all of you who have paused in this moment to gather in this way via Zoom. I want to begin tonight with a poem as a prayer from Episcopal Bishop Stephen Charleston. He's a member of the Choctaw Nation. He's written a beautiful book, compiled a beautiful book of prayers entitled Spirit Wheel. And so I invite you to take a deep breath. Close your eyes if you are comfortable doing so. Settle yourself with your cup of tea or your dog. I'll read this poem for us as an opening prayer. We'll have a moment of silence followed by music, and then each of our speakers and more music. Stephen Charleston writes, "Come stand with me on a wilder shore, where age is not an impediment to dreams, and life begins anew each dawn, when the Spirit whispers in your ear. We are not bound by illness or chained to time, but live with such a future in our hearts. Jealous death cannot contain it, even if one day death will try."
But as we sit in the afterglow of that beautiful music, I'm going to invite you just to stay still, perhaps with your eyes closed, and let yourself really feel your bottom on the chair that you're sitting in or the floor that you're lying on. To be really present to where you are and how you are at the moment. And to let your breath and your memory and your imagination connect you to a time or a place in memory or imagination where we might say you felt something of consolation. And consolation is a state or a place of love, peace, joy. So this might be something that happened. It might be an encounter with another person or another being. It might be a place. I've been walking on the beaches of New Zealand these last days, and so it's easy for me to connect to a place that feels spacious and beautiful. So just for a moment, connect with something like that for yourself. Something that your heart opens towards. And as you sit there in the memory or in the imagination of that, let your heart open a bit more to it. And a little bit more. To sit in the wonder or the warmth or the sense of love that it brings. And let yourself feel the gratitude of that. Both a thank you and a yes towards it. And knowing that you can return to that at any point. Let's now just come back to each other in the Zoom room. And yet continue to hold that. Maybe for the rest of the session, you can hold something of that encounter for the next time, for the next while. So just briefly, I want to say kia ora, which is the Kiwi way of the Maori way of saying hello in New Zealand. Another way is saying g'day. And I am coming to you from the future. It is Thursday afternoon here. I think some of you are about 21 hours behind me. So I have lived my Wednesday night and Thursday. It always feels very odd. And I've been asked to give a reflection on prayer. So that was a little introduction to one way in which we might connect with what feels more than ourselves. The bigger story, the divine, the beauty of life. We can name it in all sorts of ways, and we can come to it in all sorts of ways. There are formal ways of coming to prayer. that various religions offer us, liturgical. We're encouraged to pray for what we need, to ask for what we need. We're encouraged to intercede for other people and other places. And we might just sit in the kind of the mystery of whatever this bigger story is that we call God. You have many names for it. So for me, prayer is about relationship in the way that we might nurture any of our relationships. Prayer is how we nurture our relationship with the divine. And it seems to me, I'm not a natural meditator. I'll be upfront about that. I'm not someone who can easily sit in silence with no other stimuli, I guess. So for me, walking on the beach on this holiday has been my practice of prayer, of connecting to the greater and bigger story. So it can be anything. It can be in any place and in so many different ways, and can be individual to each of us. But there is a lot of wise teaching down the ages that says, in the theme of this evening, it's really good to be intentional about it. So we could say, oh, well, I'm always in the presence of God. And of course we are. But it's good at times to let our awareness be intentional about that, to say, this is a place and a time that I am seeking the divine. But beyond that, it can come in any ways. There's an old book called Practicing the Presence of God, where the writer it really can be anything. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. I'm getting a message that my connection is unstable. And just very briefly, because I've only got these few minutes, I want to say I'm really interested at the moment in how prayer helps and nourishes our brains. And I think there are people here who are into various forms of neuroscience, and I am not a neuroscientist, but it feels to me that prayer is good for us. There's something it does similarly to psychedelics in that it opens us up to more of our awareness, more of our neural pathways, in all sorts of ways. It's healthy, and I'm wondering about that at the moment. How is it that this is built into our physiology, that prayer is good for us? And finally, just how am I praying this Lent? I've mentioned walking on the beach. I'm trying to do that each day that I'm near a beach. We're visiting various sacred sites here in New Zealand, and they've opened me up to thinking about how everything is sacred and looking for the sacred in all places. I'm posting a photo a day on Instagram. And we went to the supermarket the other day, and I walked around with an intention and awareness of what do I want to choose to eat in Lent, and how can I make choices for perhaps things that are more simple, a simpler way of eating. So I suspect I've used up my time, and I'll leave it at that. And it's lovely to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me.
I've been asked to give a few quotes or thoughts or reflections on fasting and how that is a pillar for Lent. And I'm sure many of us can remember having to give up something, either we liked, or I, for one, would take up cigars during college so that I had something to give up for Lent. But I want to talk about it being more than just about food. And there is also a connection between fasting and the indigenous medicine work that we do. If you think about the ceremonies of it, it has to do with fasting. It has to do with parts of the ceremony that provide healing and spiritual connection, or seeking guidance from ancestors and spirits. That's not far off from our Christian Lenten fasting traditions, originating from the 40 days of Jesus being in the wilderness. And it again, there are other groups, there are Western groups, there are Eastern religions. And with that also, it's the duration of it. Some of that fasting can be for days or for weeks. The purpose and intents of it having to do with the underlying healing and purification. And very much that is a Christian tradition of how that practice has come into that. From a traditional Christian perspective, fasting about giving up certain foods. But what would fasting look like if we look through the contemporary lens? In that contemporary lens, fasting can still encompass abstaining from certain foods, but it can also extend beyond dietary restrictions. So let's look at a couple of those. I'm sure we all know about digital fasting. In today's technology, it's sometimes temporary disconnecting from that phone, from our television. It can give us time not to just let our brains rest, but would also give us time for some spiritual growth and silence. Environmental fasting, looking at what we can do for sustainability. We hear about the importance of doing that. What is our role in doing that? How can we abstain from purchasing non-essential items? How can we resources of conservation for water and electricity? How do we participate in initiatives like Meatless Mondays and in reducing our environmental footprint? Also fasting from negative habits and behaviors. Now they always say you don't, that's not really fasting, but if you've got a couple of good ones, sometimes that really is if you're going to give up your beer and cigars during Lent. Also examples include gossiping, procrastination, consuming of alcohol, caffeine, unhealthy relationships. Also looking at our consumerism. How are we culturally fasting that involve resisting the urge to indulge in excessive materialism? Also from entertainment or media consumption. Fasting for something, as in social justice. I don't know if any of you remember, we would have done that in the past for protesting or activism, drawing attention to social injustices and inequalities, such as poverty, racism, human rights abuse. And also fasting for health and wellness. I mean, it's a double-edged sword in that sense that we can support non-productive activities that we're in. You can participate in juices, fasting, and dietary interventions. In essence, fasting is a contemporary context involving intentionally abstaining from certain activities, behaviors, or indulgences in order to cultivate self-discipline, mindfulness, spiritual and personal growth. It can be a powerful tool for reflection, for renewal, for reevaluating our priorities. Viewing Lenten fasting through a contemporary Christian lens is a way of sustainable joy involving recognizing the deeper spiritual significance behind the practice, such as focusing on our spiritual growth. Lenten fasting encourages beliefs and deepening those relationships with God. By abstaining from certain comforts or indulgences, we create space for prayer, for reflection, for introspection, leading into a deeper sense of fulfillment and joy that is rooted in faith. Cultivating gratitude. Cannot have enough gratitude. By voluntarily giving up certain luxuries or habit during Lent, individuals gain a heightened appreciation for the blessings that they often take for granted. That practice of gratitude fosters a sustainable sense of joy and transcends temporary pleasures and is rooted in our awareness of God's abundant goodness. Empathy and solidarity. Too often, we are involved in acts of self-denial and sacrifice, which can foster empathy and solidarity with those who are less fortunate. Engaging in acts of service, charity, social justice during Lent reminds believers of their interconnectedness with each other and the contribution to not just a society, but bring a deeper and more sustainable joy derived from meaningful connections and shared humanity. Also, it's an opportunity to renew our focus on core values. Lenten fasting prompts believers to reevaluate their priorities and realign their lives with core Christian values such as love, compassion, humility, service. By simplifying our lives and stripping away distractions, individuals can experience a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment rooted in living out their faith authentically. Hope and resilience. Lent is a season of preparation and anticipation leading up to Easter, the celebration of Christ's resurrection. Fasting during Lent reminds believers of the hope and promise of new life that is to come through Christ's victory over sin and death. This focus on hope and resilience in the face of adversity fosters a sustainable joy that is grounded in the assurance of God's faithfulness and the promise of redemption. Overall, Lenten fasting can be viewed as a transformative journey towards sustainable joy, characterized by spiritual growth, gratitude, empathy, renewed focus, and core values, as a deepening sense of hope and resilience in Christ. By embracing the disciplines of Lent, believers can experience a joy that is lasting and fulfilling, rooted in their faith and relationship with God. In the quiet hush of Lenten fasting, we find the grace of sustainable joy. It is not in the abundance of feasting that we discover true fulfillment, but in the tender discipline of restraint. Like the slender branches swaying in the spring breeze, we learn to bend without breaking, to let go without losing ourselves. In this season of introspection, we tread lightly upon the earth, mindful of the sacredness of all living things. With each step, we carry the weight of our intentions, seeking not to diminish, but to nourish the world around us. For Lenten fasting is not a deprivation, but a celebration of simplicity. It is the song of the sparrow, finding sustenance in the humblest of seeds. It is the dance of the daffodil, blooming brightly in the dappled sunlight. It is the gentle rhythm of fasting we discover the abundance of our own hearts. We find joy, not in the accumulation of possessions, but in the richness of our connections to each other, to the earth, and to the divine presence that dwells within us all. So let us embrace this season of Lent with open arms and open hearts. Let us walk softly upon the earth, mindful of the sacredness of our lives, and in the simplicity of our fasting, let us find the sustenance of sustainable joy. Thank you.
About 15 years ago, I learned of a place called Avalon Springs. Sounds magical, doesn't it? It was. Avalon Springs was an intentional community that had purchased an old an out-of-date and run-down hot springs resort, and they were in the process of renovating it to create an eco-village where this intentional community would live. And in the springs area, they would create a healing center and a retreat center. It was in the early stages of development, and every month or so during the spring and summer and fall, they hosted garden work days. And so I jumped at this opportunity to go because three of my favorite things: hot springs, gardens, and intentional communities. The workday was hosted by the cornerstone of that community, a woman named Bhakti. We tended the compost piles, we pulled weeds, we planted squash for the fall harvest. And all the while, there was not a single feeling of urgency or rushing. We accomplished a lot of work, but it was just this beautiful, peaceful day of working in the garden. And as we worked in the garden and harvested some vegetables and prepared a meal for the night, I got to know this woman, Bhakti. Bhakti lived on a commune as part of a spiritual community for over 20 years. And she told stories of living on that commune, of the beautiful rites of passage that she and other elder women would lead for the young people that were coming of age. She also shared some very valuable organic gardening tips. We made this wonderful meal. We were about to eat it when she gathered us all together and invited us to hold hands. And she invited us into a real sense of presence with one another. She said, look in each other's eyes. Notice your breath. Become present to this place and this time and each other. She invited us to share things that we were grateful for. And that's the story of how a Christian college minister relearned how to pray from a new-aged hippie elder named Bhakti. Now, at the time, I had probably witnessed or even prayed myself over a meal thousands of times, but that ritual had somehow gotten a little bit stale. Brother David Steindl-Rast talks about systems of religion, and he talks about how often religions begin with some kind of mystical experience. And that leads to some truth or a doctrine from which one wants to order and hold valuable in their life. And from that, usually a community will want to harmonize their life to that truth, that doctrine, and create a code of ethics from which to live by. And then create rituals that either share gratitude for this community, for the insight that they had learned, or to give them another mystical experience. But what often happens, Brother David says, is that those elements ossify, they calcify, they go stale. And the doctrine often becomes dogma. The ethics becomes legalism, and the rituals become ritualism. And that's what happened for me with just that simple ritual of offering thanks before a meal. And yet my friend Bhakti reinvigorated that practice by breathing intention into it. After all, what better intention to have before a meal than to become present to the other people there and to offer gratitude? What rituals have staled in your life? Maybe that's something to consider this Lenten season. And what intentions might you bring to your rituals to breathe new life into them? As this event is called Ember Evenings, I imagine my dead and stale rituals like piles of ash, little campfires that are surrounding me. And I'm feeling the invitation to breathe into them and to find those embers, to breathe them back into flame. And so that's my invitation for you for this season. To breathe intention and life into the embers of the stale rituals in your life. Thank you.
Thank you to each of our speakers. Thank you all for joining your hearts and minds in this time together. As we conclude this Zoom experience, I want to offer words of gratitude. I give thanks for music. Give thanks for strains of familiar tunes that may have echoed in our memories this evening. I give thanks for new sounds that caused our minds to perk up and pay attention. I give thanks for prayer, for consolation and connection, spaciousness, imagination, gratitude, and beaches. I give thanks for fasting, for empathy, solidarity, God's abundant goodness, for acts of charity and justice. I give thanks for interconnectedness, hope, resilience, sustainable joy, the song of sparrows and the dance of daffodils. I give thanks for intentionality, for the ways in which rundown resorts may become intentional communities. I give thanks for compost piles and the wisdom of women like Bhakti. I give thanks for rituals that may be revived and renewed in our hearts. I give thanks for the embers deep down in each of us, the embers that may yet be breathed back into flames of new life. Amen.